Text Talks.
Hello and welcome to Text Talks. This is our third podcast on Buddhism, and today we're going to be talking about Enlightenment in Mahayana Buddhism.
Yeah, so before I start, I'm going to put in a disclaimer.
Oh dear.
That unlike the previous two, there's going to be a lot of terminology, Sanskrit terminology going on here.
Okay.
So it's really, really worth looking at the accompanying PowerPoint we have to learn how to spell these words.
Mm-hmm.
And also I've given you some definitions of them on there, which I will do while we're talking, but to be able to see it as well will be really, really helpful.
Oh, definitely, with these long Sanskrit words.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've had that disclaimer, where do we start?
So I want to start, when we're thinking about enlightenment, I want to start with something that I would hope a lot of our listeners who have already done something about Buddhism would have heard of, and that's the term Bodhisattva. So who are they? They are enlightened beings in Mahayana Buddhism who, out of compassion, have stayed in the world, in the realm of samsara, in order to get other beings out. A really good extract of Bodhisattvas doing this is the parable of the burning house from the Lotus Sutra, which I know is on a lot of different syllabuses. So this is the idea that a man sees that his house is burning down and he runs outside, but all of his children are playing inside still, and because they're so focused on playing, they don't see the fire around them. Now, him shouting to them, get out, there's a fire, wouldn't grab their attention. So what he does instead is tell them, look, I've got an ox cart out here for you to play with. And that gets the children's attention and they walk out of the fire without even realising it's happening. Now this is what bodhisattvas do, or the idea of bodhisattvas. They use skillful means, so that is not necessarily telling us the full truth, but telling us the truth that we need to hear in order to lead us towards enlightenment. And they take this vow that they will not leave samsara until everyone else is out first. Until everyone is out of that burning building, they won't leave it.
That's very good of them.
Yeah. and it makes them different from arhats. So arhats are an enlightened being mostly associated with Theravada Buddhism, who don't necessarily, it's not to say they're not compassionate, but they don't take this vow to get everyone else out first.
Okay, so are arhats in Mahayana Buddhism?
Yes, they are, but they're kind of seen as lower down than bodhisattvas. They're still enlightened beings, so they're still revered, but they haven't taken this selfless vow. They've kind of achieved nirvana, and they've gone. Okay. They've completely blown out of existence, whereas bodhisattvas attain nirvana, but they don't achieve final nirvana. They stay in this life, or multiple rounds of rebirths, in order to help everyone else get out first. There is, and trying not to confuse things here, there is one bodhisattva in Theravada Buddhism, and that is Manjushri. Now, I don't want to confuse you too much, but he is there in Theravada Buddhism because the word bodhisattva means Buddha to be. So Manjushri is literally next in line after Siddhartha Gautama to become a Buddha in Theravada Buddhism. Whereas in Mahayana Buddhism, there are many Buddhas to be, or, ones that came before Siddhartha Gautama, ones that have come afterwards. So there's more bodhisattvas.
But Manjushri isn't what Mahayana would define as bodhisattva.
He actually is a bodhisattva in Mahayana Buddhism as well.
Okay.
But it's just in Theravada Buddhism, he is the only bodhisattva, and it's on the very literal sense that he's the next Buddha. Whereas in Mahayana Buddhism, it's a lot of people can be a next Buddha rather than the next Buddha.
So Manjushri in Theravada, is he sticking around until everyone else is has achieved enlightenment, or is that just in Mahayana?
That's just in Mahayana. It's Manjushri is the next in line to become the Buddha.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
So that's bodhisattvas, and there's loads of resources out there, and I know a lot of specs talk about bodhisattvas, but what I wanted to do today is explore how bodhisattvas become enlightened, and in particular I'm going to use a narrative from the Gandavyuha Sutra. Now, the Gandavyuha Sutra dates from roughly the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era. So it's a very, very old Mahayana text. And it's a story about a hero called Sudana, who is the son of a merchant. And he basically finds a call to enlightenment. And one day Manjushri, interestingly, comes and finds him and puts him on this spiritual path. And so Sudana goes around the world, or goes around India, and meets 52 different teachers. Now, these teachers are from all different walks of life. You would expect that these teachers might just be like a master on a mountain, or, a monk in a monastery. No, these teachers are from everywhere. There are kings that are teachers, there are monks that are teachers, there are even courtesans that are teachers, there is young children that are teachers. He learns from everyone. And as this story progresses, he learns more and more, and then gradually becomes enlightened. And this story would later go on to influence Zen and Pure Land schools. So it is embedded in quite popular forms of Buddhism today, but it's quite a unknown story, really. So bringing it to light is quite cool. So essential to understanding Sudana's enlightenment is the notion of Dharmakaya. Now, again, this is on the specs. Dharmakaya is part of the Trikaya, which is the 3 bodies of Buddha. And those are his earthly body, his heavenly body, and then his final body, his cosmic body. And the Dharmakaya means the cosmic Buddha. It's like a principle. It's in all of us. Buddha had that potential to become enlightened in the same way that we do. The cosmic Buddha is in us as much as it is in Siddhartha Gautama. And in Mahayana Buddhism, this is known as the theory of Tathagatagarbha. So that is a mouthful.
That's a long word.
But we can also kind of translate this as Buddha embryo. And that's because we're all empty, shunyata, which I talked about a lot in last week's podcast. We all have the same potential to become enlightened. We all have this thing inside of us.
So, does Buddha embryo mean we have a soul? Because that doesn't fit with what I know about Buddhism. Yeah,
that is a common misconception. A lot of people see Tathagatagarbha and Buddhism does say they have a soul. That's not the case. Tathagatagarbha is not like a physical thing that resides in us. It's a potential. So just like a ball doesn't contain in it being thrown, it still has the potential to be thrown. And in the same way, we all have the Tathagatagarbha, but unless we cultivate it, it won't come to anything. So we all have this potential. But next to that comes this spark. So we've got the potential in us, but then something triggers it. And that's the bodhicitta. This is the thought of awakening. So we've got the potential, and now we're like, you know what? I want to become awakened. I want to become enlightened. It's very similar to when Buddha had this, when he sees the 4 sights, that was his bodhicitta. That was his awakening, his realising that something was up.
The inspiration.
Yeah, we've got the potential, then we need some inspiration, and then we'll go on this enlightening path. And so that, in the story of Sudana has that when Manjushri visits him. He's like, now is the time that I will go on this path of awakening. And then it's this pledge that you make to yourself that everything you do from this point out is out of compassion for all beings. But more importantly, for what I'm talking about here, is that there's also a shift in perspective.
Is perspective important for understanding enlightenment in Mahayana Buddhism?
I think it's the most important thing. Because when someone becomes enlightened, they shift their vision from pratibhasa to a more holistic view.
Okay, what do you mean by pratibhasa?
So pratibhasa is the world how we, as non-enlightened beings, see it. In the text, it's the idea that we see everything in the world as distinct from one another. You are you, and I'm me. But for the Mahayana school, this is kind of an illusion, as everything is ultimately interdependent. And there's that word again, go check out the last 2 weeks' worth of podcasts. I talk about interdependence a lot. But this is an illusion, and pratibhasa is the idea that that illusion is real, and that we all have independent existences. So instead, enlightened beings see the world through the Buddha Visaya, or Buddha vision. So this is seeing things not from the perspective of an individual, but from the whole. And in order to do this, they have Samanta, and that is seeing from all sides. Now, in the Sudana story, Sudana learns about seeing from all sides through his 52 different meetings. Like I said, they're from a diverse background, there's lots of different people he meets. He sees literally lots of different views of society, and it's only the culmination of all of these views that he can achieve the Buddha vision, seeing the world from all perspectives. And this story has a really nice message because it means then we can learn something from everybody. You know, the person down the street might teach you something about history, and then you're talking to someone in a supermarket and suddenly you're learning about business and economics. You know, you can expand this out into our world as we live it. But what we can do from this is that in order to be enlightened, we need to see all points of view. Nirvana isn't something beyond reality. It's a clear vision of the world that we live in, this interconnected vision. And if we listen back to Dr. Black's mini lecture on samsara, he talks about Nagarjuna arguing that nirvana and samsara are kind of one and the same. It's just our own perception that alters, not the world itself. And this is the same in Sudana's story. For example, he goes to the city of Sapabra, and when he's there, he visits a king, and he points out that each person sees his city according to their own mental dispositions. So, where Sudana sees jewelled buildings and moats of jewels and clouds of jewels and all this radiant glory, a non-enlightened being would just see mud huts. So enlightenment isn't something beyond this world in the Mahayana texts. It's seeing the world as it truly is. And in the Sudana case, that's then depicted as this jewelled world. Another good example from the Gandavyuha is about Buddha's own enlightenment and those who couldn't see it. So I'm going to give you a brief extract. The situation was like that of hundreds of thousands of ghosts gathered on the bank of the great river Ganges. Hungry and thirsty, naked, without shelter, emancipated, dehydrated by the wind and the heat, attacked by flocks of crows, terrorized by wolves and jackals. They do not see the Ganges River, or they may see it as dry, without water, or full of ashes, because they are shrouded by actions that blind them, in the same way that the old great disciples there in the Jeta Grove did not see or penetrate the transfigurations of the Buddha, because they rejected omniscience and their eyes were veiled by ignorance. So in this example, people were there at Buddha's enlightenment, but they couldn't see all of these miracles occurring around them because of their own ignorance, because of their perspective of reality.
Interesting. So what happens to Sudana in the end of the story?
So after visiting all of the Kalyana Mitras, all of his good friends that help him on his way, Sudana goes to the Tower of Maitreya, where he is shown all realms and that all beings are interdependent. And then he's put in his own Buddha field, where the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra, known as universally wise and is linked to meditation, places his hand on his shoulder. Now this is the really cool bit. This is where we get wibbly wobbly timey wimey. Because we're then transported back to Buddha's own enlightenment, where Sudana sees Samantabhadra place his hand on Buddha's shoulder at his moment of enlightenment. So Sudana sees Buddha's own enlightenment despite the fact it happened in the past.
Wow.
Yes, the Gandavyuha has time travel. Because of Sudana's Buddha Visaya, his Buddha vision, he's able to see the events of the past, like Buddha's enlightenment, the present, and the future, and thus can guide people as a bodhisattva to reach enlightenment themselves.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So to sum up, bodhisattvas obviously are enlightened beings in Mahayana Buddhism, but in order to get there philosophically, we have to understand the process of shunyata, this idea that everything is empty. Tied in with that, we have to understand the Dharmakaya as part of the Trikaya, so that is the universal Buddha. That's the idea that Buddha has the potential to be in all of us because Buddha is the universe and vice versa. This leads us to have the Tathagata Garbha, which is the Buddha embryo inside all of us, which isn't a soul, it's a potential. This then leads to the bodhicitta, This is the idea that we have an awakening moment. So that's something that sparks the Tathagatagarbha within inside of us. And then this finally, at the end of an enlightened path, leads to Buddhavisaya. That is the vision of a Buddha. And that vision is Samnata, which is the idea that we can see perspectives from all sides, outside of the space and time, like continuum that we as humans are stuck in.
Okay, wow. So, yeah, I think definitely check out the PowerPoint just to keep on top of all those words, but very impressive pronunciation and memory there, Alex.
And we've also got worksheets on this as well, which tie in. So, again, I know these are big, scary words, but if you understand them in this sequence, it kind of all ties in together. It makes logical sense.
Absolutely.
And again, if you've got any questions about any of this stuff, feel free to contact us on Facebook at Text Talks, on Twitter at TextTalks1, or email us at inquiry.texttalks@gmail.com.
So what are we talking about next week?
Next week, we are going to be talking about mindfulness. And I'm going to talk about modern mindfulness as well as mindfulness in the Mindfulness Sutta.
Exciting. Right, well, be sure to check that out. Thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next week.